On the cold side of a forgotten city, beneath the gray sky and broken power lines, a little African boy named Emmanuel walked alone. His shirt was torn. His shoes were mismatched. His stomach had not felt full in days. But his eyes, they still carried a light that only those who have known true pain could still carry. He held tightly to a small brown paper bag. Inside it, a few pieces of old bread he had received from a street vendor with pity in her eyes. It was all he had. Not just for the day, but maybe for the week. His tiny fingers trembled from the cold, yet he crossed the street without fear. Cars rushed by, horns echoed. But no one truly saw him. Emmanuel lived in the basement of an abandoned building, wrapped in blankets older than him. No one knew where he came from, no birth record, no photo of a family. Only a small silver locket around his neck with a faded picture inside. The face in that photo was a woman smiling. A woman who once called him son. As Emmanuel stepped onto the wet crosswalk, a sudden wind blew the bread from his hand. Without thinking, he chased it. A loud engine roared. A black luxury car came around the corner. Fast, too fast. Screeching brakes tore through the air. Tires burned the road. But it was too late. The crowd froze. Some screamed. Others gasped. The car struck the boy. His small body rolled, then lay still on the cold concrete. The driver rushed out. He was an older man, dressed in a suit, hands trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. People gathered, watching. Whispers filled the air. Then, as the man bent down, something caught his eye. A silver chain. A locket. His hands reached out, and when he opened it, his face turned pale. Inside was a photo he recognized. A photo he had once held in his own wallet. Decades ago. His breath stopped. His knees hit the ground. Because the boy lying broken before him was not a stranger. He was his blood. He was the grandson he never knew existed. But it was already too late to turn back the time. Rain began to fall over the city, soft at first, then heavier, like the sky itself was weeping for the child. Emmanuel's small body lay still on the wet asphalt. People had gathered, but none dared move. Their eyes were fixed on the old man, now kneeling in silence beside the boy, his suit soaked, his hands trembling. His fingers clutched the silver locket tighter, as if afraid it would vanish like a dream. He stared at the image inside, the woman with warm eyes and braided hair, the woman he had once held in his arms as a baby. His daughter, the daughter he had lost to time and tragedy. She had vanished long ago, and with her, the chance to ever know her child. And now, here he was, broken, bleeding, lying unconscious in the street, not knowing that the very man who had hit him was the only family he had left. An ambulance screamed through the rain. The crowd parted as the medics moved quickly. They worked fast, checking for breath, pulse, signs of life. His chest moved barely. His pulse was faint. But he was still alive. They lifted him gently onto a stretcher. The old man followed, numb, his hand still clutching the locket. He said nothing, not a word. But in his chest, memories began to tear through him like a flood. Years ago, he had made choices. Cold choices. Business over family. Pride over peace. He had pushed his daughter away when she chose a path different from what he wanted. She left, carrying pain, carrying new life inside her. He never saw her again. And now, this boy, this tiny soul, had grown in silence, in struggle, on the streets of a world that never knew his name. At the hospital, doctors rushed Emmanuel into surgery. His head had bled, his ribs were cracked, his leg was broken. But he was young, and life still clung to him. As the machines beeped and the lights blinked above him, the boy's fingers never let go of the brown paper bag, now soggy and torn. Old man waited in a chair outside the emergency room, his clothes drenched, his eyes empty. Nurses passed him by. No one asked who he was. He didn't know how to speak the words. I am his grandfather. Not yet. Not when shame weighed heavier than rain. Night fell. Thunder rolled in the distance. The hallway lights dimmed. Then a nurse approached slowly. Her face was tense. He's breathing, she said softly, but he hasn't woken up. The old man nodded, still silent. She handed him the boy's belongings, a wet shirt, a torn shoe, and the soaked bread. But it was the second item she handed him that made his heart stop again, a folded paper. Inside, the boy had drawn a picture. House, a tree, and two stick figures, one big, one small. Above them, he had written in shaky handwriting, "One day I will have a family." The old man stared at it, rain still dripping from his hair, as lightning lit up the hallway window. But deep inside he knew, this child's life was never meant to end here. That night, the hospital halls were silent, except for the soft beeping from behind the ICU door. Emmanuel lay still, wrapped in wires and bandages, his small chest rising and falling with fragile breath. The machines did what his little body could not. And outside that room, on a hard bench beneath a flickering light, the old man sat awake. He hadn't closed his eyes since the accident. The paper with the child's drawing remained in his hands. It was crumpled now, the ink smudged from the rain and from his fingers. He had read the same sentence 100 times. One day, I will have a family. Those words dug into him deeper than any wound ever could. Because the man who sat there cold, ashamed, haunted was the reason that child had none. He tried to remember the face of his daughter the last time they spoke. He couldn't. He had erased it. Replaced it with bitterness, with silence, with business meetings and boardroom deals. While she struggled, he had thrived. While she gave birth to a boy on a hospital floor with no one beside her, he was on stage receiving an award. And now, the reward he had chased his entire life had found him here on a bench, holding the drawing of a boy he almost killed. As the hours passed, his name echoed in his ears, Mr. Abraham Grant, a name once powerful, once respected. Now it felt hollow. He was no longer a tycoon, no longer the man in glossy magazines. He was just a man with a locket and a broken child behind a door. At dawn, a nurse returned. She offered coffee. He refused. She told him Emmanuel's condition was stable, but still critical. The boy hadn't opened his eyes. The brain scan showed swelling. There was hope, but only if time was kind. Mr. Grant stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Taxis honked. People walked by. The world never stopped. But in his chest, time had frozen. He looked at the locket again, then slowly reached into his coat pocket. Inside, he still carried his wallet. Inside that wallet, untouched for decades, was a small photo. His daughter. The same woman from the boy's locket. Smiling, young, full of dreams. A tear rolled down his cheek, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, like everything else in his life. Now, he whispered nothing, but inside, something began to break. It wasn't guilt, it was longing. He turned from the window and walked to the ICU door. He placed a trembling hand on the glass, watching Emmanuel sleep beneath the machines. For a moment, he didn't see wires or bandages. He saw a boy holding a drawing. A boy who never asked for money, never asked for help, just a family. And for the first time in his long broken life, Mr. Grant realized he might still have time to give it to him. That night, the hospital halls were silent, except for the soft beeping from behind the ICU door. Emmanuel lay still, wrapped in wires and bandages, his small chest rising and falling with fragile breath. The machines did what his little body could not. And outside that room, on a hard bench beneath a flickering light, The old man sat awake. He hadn't closed his eyes since the accident. The paper with the child's drawing remained in his hands. It was crumpled now, the ink smudged from the rain and from his fingers. He had read the same sentence 100 times. One day, I will have a family. Those words dug into him deeper than any wound ever could. Because the man who sat there cold, ashamed, haunted was the reason that child had none. He tried to remember the face of his daughter the last time they spoke. He couldn't. He had erased it. Replaced it with bitterness, with silence, with business meetings and boardroom deals. While she struggled, he had thrived. While she gave birth to a boy on a hospital floor with no one beside her, he was on stage receiving an award. And now, the reward he had chased his entire life had found him here on a bench, holding the drawing of a boy he almost killed. As the hours passed, his name echoed in his ears, Mr. Abraham Grant, a name once powerful, once respected. Now it felt hollow. He was no longer a tycoon, no longer the man in glossy magazines. He was just a man with a locket and a broken child behind a door. At dawn, a nurse returned. She offered coffee. He refused. She told him Emmanuel's condition was stable, but still critical. The boy hadn't opened his eyes. The brain scan showed swelling. There was hope, but only if time was kind. Mr. Grant stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Taxis honked. People walked by. The world never stopped. But in his chest, time had frozen. He looked at the locket again, then slowly reached into his coat pocket. Inside, he still carried his wallet. Inside that wallet, untouched for decades, was a small photo. His daughter. The same woman from the boy's locket. Smiling, young, full of dreams. A tear rolled down his cheek, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, like everything else in his life. Now, he whispered nothing, but inside, something began to break. It wasn't guilt, it was longing. He turned from the window and walked to the ICU door. He placed a trembling hand on the glass, watching Emmanuel sleep beneath the machines. For a moment, he didn't see wires or bandages. He saw a boy holding a drawing. A boy who never asked for money, never asked for help, just a family. And for the first time in his long broken life, Mr. Grant realized he might still have time to give it to him. The next morning brought no sunshine, only gray clouds and restless winds. Inside the hospital, Mr. Grant sat across from a woman in a white coat. Her voice was calm, practiced. She spoke of surgery, risk, and recovery. Emmanuel had survived the night, but his condition was delicate. He needed support, not only from medicine, but from someone who could speak for him. Legally. The question came without warning. Are you his guardian? Mr. Grant paused. The room felt colder. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to scream it. But the truth stood heavier than words. He had never held this boy before yesterday. Never searched for him. Never once imagined the child even existed. Yet the paper was pushed toward him. A form. A space for a name. The line asked for relationship to patient. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. Slowly, carefully, he wrote, grandfather. It felt unreal. As if by writing it, he was reaching into a past he had abandoned. As if he was being given a second chance by a force far greater than justice. Far greater than guilt. The doctor nodded, unaware of the storm inside the man before her. Then, she asked for identification. Proof. He opened his wallet, took out the photo of his daughter, placed it beside the locket. The resemblance was unmistakable. She said nothing more, only walked away to begin the process. Mr. Grant remained at the desk, alone with the form. His name now tied to a child who bore the face of the woman he had failed, his daughter. His only child. He stood up slowly and made his way back to the ICU. The nurse opened the door quietly. allowing him inside. Emmanuel still hadn't moved. His skin was pale, lips dry. Machines blinked, breathing for him. The paper bag of bread was placed on the table beside him, now dry, its edges fragile. Mr. Grant took the child's small hand into his own. It was cold, but real. And that was enough. He sat by the bed and waited. All day. All night. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. He just held on. Then sometime before dawn, something shifted. A slight twitch. A finger. Then another. The monitor beeped louder, faster. The nurse ran in, eyes open, not fully, not strong, but enough. Emmanuel was waking. The boy's lips parted. No sound came out, but he turned his head slightly. His eyes scanned the room, and then they stopped. They stopped on the man holding his hand, not because he knew who he was, but because for the first time in his life, someone was there. Someone who hadn't walked away. The morning light slipped through the blinds in quiet lines, casting gentle shapes across the hospital walls. Emmanuel's eyes were open now, weak, unfocused, but open. The doctors called it progress. The nurses called it a miracle, but Mr. Grant, he didn't call it anything. He just sat there, watching, hoping, breathing in silence. Emmanuel blinked slowly, his head barely turning on the pillow. His face was pale, his lips dry. His eyes moved, but they carried no spark of recognition. Not of the machines, not of the room, not of the man beside him, not even of the silver locket still around his neck. The doctor stepped in and explained gently, "He doesn't remember what happened. The trauma may have affected his memory. It may return with time, or it may not." Mr. Grant said nothing, because deep inside, he already knew what that meant. The boy didn't know him. He didn't know anything. His past erased. His pain, locked away somewhere deep. But as the old man looked into those eyes, he saw something else, not memory, not understanding. But fear. A quiet, trembling fear that lives only in children who have never known safety. He reached out again, slowly. His fingers brushed Emmanuel's hand, and this time the boy did not pull away. The day moved slowly. Visitors came for other patients. Nurses changed shifts. But inside that room, time stood still. Mr. Grant told the staff he would stay. No hotel, no assistant, no phone calls. He didn't need them now. He didn't want them. He had sat at the top of the world once, owned buildings, controlled empires, but now, all he wanted was to sit beside a boy who had nothing, a boy he had once unknowingly abandoned, a boy he had nearly killed. That night, as the lights dimmed and quiet returned, Mr. Grant opened the paper bag and placed a piece of the now stale bread on the tray beside the bed. He didn't know why. Maybe to remind the child that his story wasn't forgotten, that even if his memory failed him, someone would remember for him. He reached into his pocket and took out something new, a photograph, a new one, taken just an hour earlier. It showed a hospital bed, a child lying in it, and beside him, an old man, holding his hand. It wasn't a photo of pain, it was a photo of presence. He placed the picture on the nightstand, right beside the boy's drawing, then leaned forward and whispered softly into the fiwa. Stillness. No promises, no explanations. Just presence. Because sometimes, healing doesn't begin with words. It begins with someone who chooses to stay. The days passed slowly, wrapped in silence and gentle beeping machines. Emmanuel stayed in his bed, eyes open but distant, his small body still healing from the collision that nearly ended his life. His memories did not return. His voice had not yet come, and no visitors came looking for him. There were no cards, no flowers, no family. Except one man. Mr. Grant. Every morning, he returned to the same chair, with the same jacket, with the same quiet grief. He brought nothing with him but a bag of fresh bread, Not to eat, but to place on the table, as if offering back what the boy had lost the moment he stepped onto that street. As if saying, "This time I will not take anything from you." Sometimes Emmanuel looked at him, not long, not deeply, but long, enough to know he was there. Still there. And sometimes that was enough. One day, a nurse entered the room with a clipboard and spoke gently. "The boy needs placement. He can't stay here forever. We've contacted social services. They'll find a shelter." Mr. Grant didn't respond. She asked again, "Is there anyone else? Anyone who can claim him officially?" He said only this, "I already have." The nurse paused. She hadn't expected that, but Mr. Grant had already signed the forms, filed the paperwork. He had used his real name, not the one on magazine covers or business boards. Just Abraham Grant, a man reclaiming the last piece of the family he once let go. Yet he knew paperwork wouldn't fix what had been broken. He couldn't erase the years Emmanuel had lived in the shadows of the world. He couldn't give back. Birthdays spent alone, nights slept beside dumpsters, dreams crushed by hunger. But he could show up, again, and again, and again. So he did. Each morning, he brought a newspaper, but never read it. He brought bread, but never ate. He brought stories from his heart, but never spoke them aloud, because the boy wasn't ready to hear. And Mr. Grant wasn't ready to explain. He just stayed. And on the 7th morning, something changed. As he reached to place a new drawing beside the boy's bed, a sketch he had made himself of a house by the sea, he felt something small. A tug. The boy's fingers had touched his. It wasn't strong. It wasn't even steady, but it was real. And in that moment, under the hum of hospital lights, a door opened. Not of memory, but of trust. The morning was still when Emmanuel's hand gripped Mr. Grant's for the second time. No one spoke. The machines carried on. But something unseen had shifted in the quiet air of the hospital room. The boy who once wandered the streets alone, the boy who had never known a name to call his own, was now holding on. And this time, Mr. Grant held back. Not as a stranger, not as a man with guilt, but as a grandfather. In the days that followed, recovery came slowly. Emmanuel began to eat in silence, still wary, still fragile. His voice had not returned, but his eyes followed Mr. Grant now. And his hands, though thin and tired, no longer trembled when touched. Outside, the city moved fast. People rushed. Lives spun. But inside that room, time was patient. One afternoon, the nurse who had watched over the boy brought in clothes. Not the hospital kind, but real ones. A sweater, clean pants, socks without holes. Mr. Grant had bought them himself. He didn't say why. He simply handed them to Emmanuel, who took them slowly, cautiously, like someone who had never been given something without needing to give something back. When the child stood on his own for the first time, Mr. Grant was there to steady him. He didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He simply opened his arms and waited. Emmanuel took one shaky step, then another. And into those arms, he fell. There was no need for words, because what had been broken in the street that day was no longer a wound. It was the beginning. A week later, they left the hospital together. No reporters, no headlines. Number one even knew who the man was, or what the boy had been through. The world didn't see it, but as they walked through the front doors, something remarkable happened. The boy reached for the man's hand, and he didn't let go. They didn't have a destination yet. No plans, no promises, just a photo in a pocket, a drawing of a house, and a silver locket that no longer hung heavy with grief, but with hope. Because sometimes, family isn't built with memories. It's built when someone chooses to stay long after the world has walked away. And on that day, under the soft sky and the quiet streets, a boy without a past took his first steps. into a future that had finally come looking for him, with the only hand that had never let him go.